Hi, Miss Meenal.
Hi, Rishan.
Ma'am, very recently we heard that Amazon India was called to depose before one of the parliamentary committees looking into the personal data protection bill. But unfortunately, Amazon, rather, they claim that they don't have any adequate representation on that juncture. Could you please help us understand what this deposition was supposed to be all about, and rather what's happening about the PDP in the parliament as of right now?
Sure, I would love to answer that. Just to give you a bit of a background and to explain the issue better. See, the Personal Data Protection Bill is a bill that was launched in the Parliament in 2019, and the bill was launched to make sure that there's a law tomorrow in place to deal with all concerns in relation to data, any technology wherein people, meaning individuals and companies that collect these data and process them, has a regulation around it. Now, what happened recently in the parliament was obviously, the Amazon representatives were required to provide certain answers to very specific question because the commands are made by companies, say in relation to any change in data or any erosion of data, any request received, if the data is being handled correctly or not. These are
Right.
regulations which are new, which are to be put in place. And what the government is trying to do is the government is trying to understand how these processes work. And therefore, companies like Amazon, Google, and Facebook come into picture because these are not only the most popular, but they also have the most amount of data to be handled. And they do are somewhere or the other they are responsible in making those sort of agreed, or sort of you can say standard the rest of the industry will sort of entity. So this is what the government is trying to do. Obviously, going forward, we know what happened, and we know that it will take time for this bill to convert into a law. But to give you an idea what this bill talks about, what it seeks to regulate is basically the fact that today, be it individuals or corporations, any registration, data or even identities or even anything that's shared, your photos, videos, anything that's shared, that information is shared on an online platform. Earlier, we only used to have an offline life, and max to max documentation were a physical record keeping exercise, which is why most of the laws are around physical documentation and how they are recorded, how they are kept. But now, considering that the world has shifted online and it's been quite a while, there obviously needs to be certain laws, certain regulation of digitization of these documents. How is this digitization dealt with? What are the impacts
Right.
that it has? Now, these all matters are covered under the Data Protection Bill. What it seeks to do is it seeks to provide a right to every person, every entity that has a data that is sort of shared. Now, to give you an example, is Just Dial. Just Dial gives you an information of all retailers, XYZ, what's the name that they're registered, what's their contact number. Now, where did Just Dial get all this information? This information was gathered by different individuals all over the country, and it was accumulated and it was built together by Just Dial, and it was made available to us in a particular form and format which was easily accessible. Now, yes, Just Dial is a company that went for listing. Just Dial is a company that also has investors. But Just Dial is also a company that was made by only taking the data from individuals who may or may not have given their consent to share it.
Right.
This is where it becomes important because there is so much information on the internet that may or may not be shared by me, but I may or may not be tagged in that picture, or I may or may not be involved in that article. Now, how do I control that information? We have seen multiple examples in the media in the recent past where individuals have been affected because certain sensitive data was shared. We do know how companies, multinationals have been affected because of data issues. And we also know that the other countries, be EU, be it the US, are trying to bring up laws that are on similar lines to protect not only the data that is being accumulated by various rights of, let's say, land, individual identity, ethnicity, etc., but also by who is the owner of that data. Because if the owner of that data is not a person who's of legal age, who is of sound mind and who has the authority to enter into it, technically it doesn't clarify any of the requirements of a basic contract. And if you need approval from someone, then that approval needs to be specific, or there needs to be a contract. Both of these principles of law are not followed, then how does an individual protect themselves under the constitution? We have the freedom of right, freedom of expression, we have right to privacy. How are these rights actually given an effect in law in today's day and age if I a privacy of data or data that is related to me? That is what the privacy law
Correct.
in general deals with. Now, going forward, to give you an idea of who it protects, it protects the data principles and it protects the people to whom the data relates. So, if a data relates to 6 people, then that data is controlled by those 6 people. Now, that is another added layer of the story, because it's not always that the data is only available to one person, or let's say 10 people, or a limited set of people. It also
Right.
matters who does it relate to. If it is my data and it does not relate to me, then ideally I do not have the right to edit it, store it, erase it, or do any other format, make a change. Because the importance that we give on data today is quite similar to the importance we've given to books in the history. We go to Wikipedia or we go to a page on the internet and we use that in today's day and age as a content or as a reference point to go back to. But who's to check if the reference point is correct or not?
Precisely.
So this bill tries to capture that point in the first instinct. In the second instinct, this bill also applies to any data that is originated from India. Now, to give you an extra idea about it, most companies in India today have investors, and they have investors wherein, under the investment agreement, the investors have the right to take and review the data of the company that they've invested in. Now, if the company, let's say, is an OYO, and that company has all the data which is relevant to India, then it is only fair for the government to ask to keep that data in India. To give you another example where this comes from is the fact that if Facebook has all its servers, let's say in the US or somewhere in the EU, and none of the servers are actually in India, then technically the data which we are debating about does not belong in the territory where the government has the right to regulate it. So the main reason this applies to the data which is locally based or locally sourced in India is because, as a country, India needs that territorial understanding to exercise its powers to make the law applicable. Because all
Right.
countries have the separate data, they need to be dealt separately. In previous times, any information exchange were taken care by treaties. Now, considering the world has shifted online, it is very difficult for the companies or for individuals to understand how is that data being used. And for the governments, if they receive any complaints, or if they receive they want to put a system around it, then the government needs to have those territorial rights, and those rights can only be exercised if that very data first is located in India. And if it is not located, then obviously it's outside of the jurisdiction of government.
Right.
Going forward, as to how minors' data is treated, because earlier I had mentioned the effects of it being a valid contract. Now, because it needs to be a valid contract, the principles of contract are also brought into the data protection bill. Now, the data protection bill clearly says that you're not of 18 years of age or above, then you need to have someone as a guardian or a parent who can give that authority, or who can actually sign off on giving that consent. The basic reason being the same, that if there is a contract or an arrangement between two parties, the principles of Contract Act should definitely apply. Which is why
Right.
I also say, as a bill, data protection should not be read in isolation. It should be read along with all other laws by MeitY, by your Information Technology Act, be it your rules, or be it anything else in the arena of RBI where they're still trying to provide rights to people to exercise, testing modules, so that if there's any testing required, to it's done in a sample format and it does not apply at large. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so very much for this, ma'am. It's been extremely helpful in understanding where the PDP stands at today.
Thank you.